Hi, my name is Chuck Marone. I'm a planner and engineer, and I am the president of Strong Towns, a nonprofit organization here in Brainerd, Minnesota. One of our initiatives, one of the projects we're working on, is called A Better Brainerd. And this series, Understanding Brainerd, is a series that we put together to talk to people here in our community about the city of Brainerd, about its historic layout and structure, and about the way that we are viewing the city. So many times when we have conversations with people, we realize that we're actually seeing a different city than what most people are seeing. And what we wanted to do is take some time to explain the way we're seeing things, which may be a little bit different and may provide some insights into why we think a better Brainerd, a Brainerd that is a better place, is well within our grasp. Part one is called the grid, and what we're going to talk about today is the historic grid of the city, the actual DNA, the framework that the city is built on, and why it creates a tremendous opportunity for us. Just real briefly, Strong Towns is a nonprofit organization. We are based out of Brainerd, Minnesota. Our mission is to support a model of growth that allows America's towns to become financially strong and resilient. We have funding from the Blandin Foundation. This project, this specific initiative, A Better Brainerd, is being funded right now by a grant from the Bremer Foundation. So we want to thank them before we go any further here. There's three main takeaways from this presentation. The first is that Brainerd is built on a traditional grid. We're going to discuss what that means here in the coming moments. Second, the traditional grid has many strengths that we often today in a society that builds largely without a grid seem to overlook or not quite comprehend. And then third, Brainerd can improve its overall philosophy by embracing its grid. It is our historic structural DNA, and when we work with it instead of against it, we see things come much, much easier. And so we're going to explain all three of these things today. The traditional grid. The grid itself has actually been with humans as long as really there's been human civilizations. Not every grid was designed with such structure. This is an early Babylonian grid. You can see the castle walls around the outside and then the internal structure being a grid format. The grid was a structure that allowed a lot of flexibility and really found itself adapted to different civilizations and different cultures around the world. This is a traditional Roman grid. When the Romans would go into community and set up a new city, they would lay down and establish the Roman grid, complete with amphitheaters and forums and markets and all the different things that would go into laying out a city. You also had, here's Giza, Egypt, a little bit different style of grid, but a grid nonetheless. China broadly used a kind of I won't call it a Confucian grid, but this almost like Zen type grid, the idea that the city would be broken up into sections like this. And when you go to a Chinese city and you look, the core of the city is going to be based on this kind of pattern with the center square gathering place with the radials outward in a grid format. Mexico City. Mexico City was based and established on a grid, the ancient Aztec culture. New York, including Manhattan, was laid out traditionally on a grid. You can even go west and see Salt Lake City laid out on a grid. And of course, when we get to our hometown here at Brainerd, Minnesota, we were laid out on this same kind of grid pattern. Understand that all of these different cultures and civilizations, whether we're talking in China, in the Fertile Crescent, in Europe, in South America, these were not places that had contact with each other. This was not like some standard that had evolved that all of these places adopted from one another. These were systems that were created in independence of each other around the world. This was found to be, in the trial and error kind of approach of the time, the optimal system on how to lay out human civilizations. And we're going to talk about those reasons here in a second, but it's important to understand as we look at our community of Brainerd, Minnesota, that it was built and laid out to function very much like the traditional grids that have been employed across landscapes for thousands and thousands of years. You have the central square there being Gregory Square. You have 6th Street that acts as kind of our main boulevard up terminating on that square. and you have the traditional grid pattern around it. The railroad coming through town with the grid kind of aligned north and south of that as a way to construct a very productive place. If you look at the grid, really, and I alluded to this, the traditional grid pattern, the conventional grid, has been with us for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, you can go back to 4, 5, 6,000 BC and see civilizations that were built out in essentially this same manner. It shows on here that beginning in the 1930s, but really there wasn't a lot of development that was happening in the 1930s and early 1940s. Beginning really after World War II, we had developed this curvilinear type of pattern. It was kind of a hybrid grid type of pattern. And if you look at Brainerd, some of the early post-World War II development had this kind of a feel to it. But as things progressed, as things got more advanced, societies in general here in North America, and Brainerd, and particularly Baxter as an example, developed what is now the conventional cul-de-sac type of pattern. The curvilinear streets with the different buildings built off of cul-de-sacs that would come off of those. The hierarchical road network, the idea that collector streets would be fed by local streets, which in turn then the collector streets would feed these major arterial streets. This is all a post-World War II innovation. Brainerd was not laid out originally, and its DNA, its pattern, its framework for construction is not the conventional cul-de-sac pattern, but the conventional grid pattern. If you look at this on the ground, you can see just two very distinct ways of utilizing 40 acres. These are 40 acres of residential property. The one on the left in Baxter would be right kind of over by the City Hall area, just on the west side of White Sand Lake. The Brainerd, then 40 acres, this would be in the Lowell School area, northeast Brainerd. Both of these residential homes laid out in the pattern of the day, but you can see a much different approach to the space, a much different approach to how this layout and design is done, and it's just simply because it was developed in a different time with a different framework and a different approach to building a place. The grid now has many, many strengths, and there's a reason why this approach to building evolved the way it did over thousands of years to be the one that was adopted in all these different places. First of all, is a tremendous flexibility of use. You can build small houses, you can build big houses, you can build commercial businesses, you can build, single-family homes of different sizes. You can build duplexes. You can build very, very large homes, all on the grid. I mean, there's an immense flexibility. If you think about, a city the size of Brainerd, you can go not only much, much smaller than us on a grid, but you can also go as intense as Manhattan on a grid. The grid system provides an enormous amount of flexibility in terms of what is actually built on it. Of course, this used to be a residential property, is now a commercial property. The grid has great flexibility of use. You're not stuck with a single style of use being the only kind that would be compatible. If the market changes or things shift, you're able to adapt properties that once were kind of residential into things that would be commercial, and vice versa. You can go both directions with that. So tremendous flexibility of use. The building styles themselves, when they're built in the traditional pattern, are also highly adaptable. This particular structure itself, when I was a kid, was a butcher shop. In recent years, it's been a number of different things. It's now up for rent right now, which kind of makes me sad. I would love to be in this historic building. It's a gorgeous place. You'll look in the upper stories. I've also had many different uses. They could be used as apartments. They could be used as offices. They could be used just as accessory to the downstairs use. There's a lot of different ways that these buildings can be adapted. It's not like this is a drive-through restaurant where the only possible use for it is a drive-through restaurant. This use could be this building, this box could be used for really anything from residential property all the way up to offices and even manufacturing if it needed to be. The grid also allows for construction of multiple price points in kind of the same general localized area. This is a picture I took in Frederick, Maryland. Beautiful, beautiful city. If you look at these, one of these properties is a $1 million home. Another one is a triplex. It has 3 living units in it. Can you guess which one is which? You really can't, because outwardly they all look the same, generally the same. But internally they're reconfigured very differently. This is something that the traditional grid does really well. It allows you the flexibility to change partitions internally, to rework different homes, and really on an individual parcel scale basis be able to meet multiple price points based on what the market conditions are at that particular point in time. This is what that entire street looks like. And as you go up and down the street, you see this enormous, this is a very mature neighborhood, obviously. This has been maturing in this way for a long, long, long time. But you see along the street not only multiple different uses, but different uses at different price points. So you have very, very high-end homes mixed with very low rent type of apartments. You've got different commercial entities, some that, again, are very exclusive and very high price point, and some that are not so much. The grid has enormous flexibility to accomplish all those things and adapt to whatever the current market situation is. The style of development we do in the grid also allows for multiple income streams. This one is over in Northeast Brainerd, our target neighborhood with the Better Brainerd project. While this building certainly has seen better days, we can just look at it and know and understand that, while the ground floor may have always had some type of commercial approach to it, right now I think it's an AA meeting center. The upper stories could have had commercial. It could have also had residential. And what this allows you to do when you have a building with this amount of internal flexibility, it allows you to adapt so that you always have some income coming in. If you own this building and you're trying to rent it out into the marketplace, you can rent it out commercially, you can rent it out residentially, you can mix and match those two. When we're talking about building financial resiliency, what we're really talking about here is not making yourself dependent on one type of market niche. By having a diversification, in a sense, of your portfolio in one lot, you really make this property far more robust. And the grid allows you to kind of naturally do that. The grid also allows for increments of growth that are not speculative and not risky, but are incremental. The whole build it and they will come mantra is really a byproduct of the post-World War II auto-oriented style of development. We've done some of this in Brainerd, where we've gone way out to the edge of town, either taken over or, in one way or another subsidized this style of development in order to try to get people to move into the city and be part of the city. This has not been successful, not only not here, but not in other places around the country. Even if these lots were to have filled in, which they are not doing at the present time, but even if they did, the revenues that we get from that would still not be enough to cover the long-term maintenance costs of all of this infrastructure that is needed to make these things possible. These are huge bets up front with the hopes that something materializes after the fact. The grid pattern allows for smaller bets over time and much more incremental growth that, if it goes bad, is going to leave you with a small problem, not with a huge problem. This is Front Street in Brainerd back in 1870. This is the earliest picture I've ever found of Front Street. You're a little bit ways away here from the Mississippi River, probably 500 feet or so away from the railroad line coming through town. You can see some very modest investments, some little buildings popped up here. They probably imported the iron and the glass, but the amount of investment that has been made to make this happen is very nominal. And if this didn't work out, some people might lose some money, but you're not going to devastate the economy. Of course, it did work out here, and so working again incrementally over time, Front Street evolved in roughly 3 decades to look something like this. This is Front Street. I've been told this is 1905 Front Street, around the turn of the century. And you see, there's a circus parade going through town, and there's lots of people out in the street. But if you look at the buildings, you see that those little 1-story shacks had been transformed into 2- and 3-story wood buildings. In another 30 years, those buildings, again, with more and more incremental style of growth, would be converted into rock and brick granite facades. This is a style of development that allows you, as the market progresses, to just build incrementally. And understand that while this style of building was going on now in the core of Brainerd, during the same time period, out on the periphery, out on the edge of town, you were seeing the same thing take place. You were seeing small little investments go up. Those investments would be added on to incrementally over time and would essentially mature in place as the neighborhoods matured and became more valuable. This is an incremental style of growth compatible with and predicated on the grid structure. If we hit a period of time where we had a Great Depression and a war, these places would stagnate. They would, maybe go into slight decline, but they're not going to collapse. And you're not going to have huge investments that you've made for future growth that go underutilized. Maybe small, modest investments at the periphery, but nothing that's going to be huge and substantial and is going to break the back financially of the community. So the grid gives you enormous resiliency because it allows you to grow incrementally. The grid actually also improves traffic flow, and this is obviously a modern day byproduct. We didn't design the grid thousands of years ago thinking that the automobiles would be able to go through here, but there was a certain amount of traffic flow from people walking through these spaces that was made better by the grid that now transfers over into the automobile. In these two different depictions, you have the exact same amount of road, the exact same amount of street, yet in the dense network of the grid, you have much greater capacity than in the hierarchical network in the dispersed building pattern. In the dispersed building pattern, of course, everybody living in those cul-de-sacs has to drive their local street out to the collector street, drive the collector street out to the arterial street. And when everybody funnels into one location, you've got a traffic congestion problem. With the grid, people have options to choose different ways to get different places. And when people have options, they're able to make smart decisions based on the current status of where things are. If one street's a little more congested, they can choose a different route, can make those decisions on the fly, and it creates a much better utilization of those millions of dollars of investment we've made in a street network. You can kind of see this graphically in this cute depiction I found and have used for a number of years. You have a house in the same exact place and a school in the same exact place, and the family is going to go from the house to the school. In the common hierarchical road network that we see in auto-based places built post-World War II, you can see that the family has to go on the local street, empty into that arterial, and then drive down to the school. It's a rather long, lengthy trip. Where the family living in the grid, while they can go that way, this certainly is an option. The most efficient option and the one they're likely to take is just to take the little street over to the school. Same place, same distance as the crow flies, but a much different utilization of resources and many, many, many more options for those people in the grid pattern. This is probably the craziest example of this I've ever seen. These are two homes in Florida that share a backyard fence. So literally to go from one home to the other by foot, you would just open up a gate between the fence and walk from one yard to the other. Yet if you're going to drive from one place to the other, it's an over 7-mile drive because of the way the road networks are set up. This is the kind of thing that the post-World War II pattern development requires us to do. The grid pattern, much more efficient, much more flexible, allows you to actually exercise your own personal common sense. The grid is very good at biking and walking options. In fact, the grid itself was initially set up by societies that walked. And so it is very conducive to cities that want to promote biking and walking as low-cost alternatives to owning an automobile. When you design and build places around people who walk, not only are they more productive financially and more resilient financially, but the grid itself is just very, very conducive. This is its kind of natural form and natural layout. if you look at the auto-centric pattern, it really doesn't lend itself well to biking and walking. This is the Baxter 371 strip. And many of us have been at Best Buy, which is there on the left side of the screen, and wanted to go to Target. Of course, they're only 1,000 feet apart. It seems like a long, long ways when you're out there, but if you're walking 1,000 feet through a traditional neighborhood in North Brainerd, it's really not that far at all to walk. But out here along the highway, that's almost an impossibility to get from one of those stores to the other by walking or biking. And even by driving, you have to drive up the highway to the traffic signal, whip a U-turn, and then come back around the other way. A very, very inefficient trip. So the grid provides really an ease of biking and walking that a city built in the way of Baxter, no amount of trails, no amount of other improvements can really make up for the fact that it's not an easy place to bike or walk. The grid is also very safe, particularly from an automobile standpoint. There have been studies, and this is a data table from one of them that shows how the standard suburban arterial street compared to a more walkable, livable, more modestly sized city street, the amount of accidents and the severity of the accidents is just enormous. In the wider street, where you have literally faster moving cars and intersections where you're going to have a potential for a lot of conflict, the accident rate is not only higher, but the fatality rate is much higher. When you get to the urban grid, what you find is that people tend to drive slower. The streets are not going to be scaled for people to drive really fast. Accidents that happen less frequently and rarely involve fatalities. A lot of the reason why it is safe is simply because of the speeds involved. If a pedestrian gets hit by someone traveling 40 miles an hour, their chance of dying is 80%. If they get hit by someone driving 20 miles an hour, their chance of dying is only 5%. So small changes in the overall speed of people has dramatic impact on the likelihood that they'll survive an accident. Cities with the traditional grid are going to have more people driving in the 20 mile an hour range than the suburban arterial, where people are driving much, much more quickly than that. The grid also has within its kind of very nature a more secure environment. There's this notion that's long been kind of understood by urban designers called eyes on the street, the notion that people will self-police their neighborhoods when they're configured with the neighborhoods themselves kind of centered on the public space out in front of them. The greatest value in an urban area is that public space out in front of the home. As you can see here on the left, these row houses all with the windows all facing the street, everything kind of looking out into this public space. And while I won't say that there'll never be a crime in one of these places, the ability to police itself, the ability of people to kind of watch the public space, and for conversely the people in the public space to know that there's a strong likelihood that someone's going to be seeing what they're doing, just has a natural tendency to reduce crime. On the other side of the equation, you've got developments like this one in our neighboring city of Baxter, where the garages are all out front, and literally you can walk up and down the street without anyone ever seeing you. As these places mature, and as the kind of demographics of them change, and they become places that are less filled with affluent people, the track record, at least in other communities across the country, has been that crime starts to go up, and these places are much more easy to burglarize. The crime in this area is is much more difficult and much more expensive to police. And so with a grid pattern, you just have a platform that, when designed correctly, has a much greater capacity for security. The grid also accommodates transit, and I put productive transit in there. We can have transit, and certainly suburban communities have transit, but productive transit is the type of transit that actually makes a place more financially productive, and in doing so covers its own costs over the long term. This map is actually a map of Brainerd's transit system. Back before we ripped up the streetcars, the streetcar ran from what is just south of where the paper mill is at today, down through northeast Brainerd onto Washington Street, through the downtown, and then down 6th Street to the edge of town, and then came back. This is what our streetcar used to look like. This was the core of downtown, being a very productive place, an attempt to connect kind of the edges, the growing parts of the community, both in South Brainerd and in Northeast Brainerd, to this productive core. Transit fit really, really nicely in this community and allowed both of those neighborhoods, Northeast Brainerd and South Brainerd, to become very prosperous, productive places in a short period of time because they were connecting and facilitating development back and forth with the downtown. The grid also allows us to leverage public investments. And this is kind of a key one. Often we look at our public buildings as being, in today's modern age, nothing but a detraction. I mean, they might bring some people into the community, but these buildings don't pay any taxes. They have huge parking lots, and the people who work there drive into town and drive out of town and don't often stay and participate and be part of what's going on in the community. And the buildings themselves have more kind of a functional quality to them, as opposed to like this building here, which had some aesthetic value to it, to the neighboring properties. If you look at a city, and I like to point out in this area, if you looked at a city like Piers, when you drive into the city of Piers, what do you see? You see this huge church parked right in the middle of town. And everything kind of radiates out in that community from the center of town, from this church with this huge steeple. They didn't put the church there because it was the cheapest property. They put the church there because having the church in that central location, this beautiful public structure, this magnificent building, was going to radiate value to the entire community. We did the same thing back in the 1930s when we put our city hall at the end of the street. The city hall in this location, with the architecture that it had, this kind of position of prominence with this very classical, powerful style of Greco-Roman architecture, just related to everything that was within its vicinity a certain level of sophistication and value. This is how you take a normal public investment, a building, a courthouse building, and bring it past just being functional as a courthouse and turn it into something that creates value for the entire community. The grid pattern allows you to do this because it allows you to frame public spaces and put at the endpoints of specific important streets things like this public building or things like a park. Again, Gregory Square, now known commonly as Gregory Park, was the end of South 6th Street. South 6th Street, or 6th Street, is Brainerd's kind of grand boulevard. When you would come into town, you would come in on 6th Street. And the idea of having Gregory Square there was that the buildings that line 6th Street would frame, the same way that a picture frame frames a picture, would frame this picture of Gregory Park at the end of the street. And this Gregory Square would be this grand public place, this very aesthetically beautiful place. You can see our ancestors put in fountains and rock abutments and all kinds of things to make this a grand place. The grid pattern allows you to do this, to create these very low cost but high impact aesthetic little improvements that leverages what otherwise would just be a standard park, leverages that to actually improve the property values throughout the entire community. Alleys. The grid also provides a platform for the construction and maintenance of alleys. On the left there, I've highlighted the electric boxes, and when you drive through, and they've crept into Brainerd as well, but when you drive through the neighboring city of Baxter and look at the residential developments, you have these very, very expensive homes with these hideously ugly utility boxes out front of them. The alleys actually provide for a great place for garbage cans, electric boxes, electric wires, all of the things that detract from the quality and the aesthetic value of the public realm are naturally go in alleys. Suburban areas do not have alleys. They're just not part of the composition. They really, can hardly afford to maintain the public space, let alone this other ancillary space. In the grid pattern, the alleys become really, really essential because they allow you to improve the overall value of the community while still handling all the day-to-day things that are necessities. The grid has unlimited growth potential, and I had mentioned Manhattan a little bit earlier. Manhattan is built on a grid that, in many respects, is the exact same as the one that Brainerd's built on. Now, I'm not suggesting that Brainerd will become Manhattan, but what I am suggesting is that if you take at one starting point Brainerd of the early 1900s, and at the other end point put Manhattan, there's a whole lot of room in between those two for decades and decades and really centuries of incremental growth without changing the underlying framework and underlying pattern. Suburban areas built around the curvilinear streets with the hierarchical road networks and the cul-de-sac do not have this flexibility of growth. Essentially, what is built there, the day it's built, is designed to be there in that style and that format forever, without significant change and without significant growth. Anything that does change or does grow generally costs a lot of money. And so the grid presents itself as a style and a framework very conducive to maturing of places over time. The grid's also financially very productive, and I've shown these slides a number of times in our community here. I'll share them with you again now. This is the kind of old rundown commercial block that we have along Washington Street. The barber shop, the pawn shop, a couple liquor stores. I've met all of these business people. They're all very nice people. They're all very kind. And so I don't mean this to disparage any of them, but I will point out these buildings were built prior to the Great Depression. Again, think of those little shacks built on Front Street and how they matured over time. This was the edge of the growth. And so this was the first iteration of construction. The idea was that over the coming decades, if this place was successful, they would continue to grow up and continue to intensify in terms of their development style. Of course, they did not do that. You had the Depression, then you had World War II, and then you had a totally different style of development introduced to Brainerd that essentially devalued these properties or made these properties not valuable enough to warrant additional investment, and so they've stagnated now for decades. The Brainerd city plans call for this block to be ultimately torn down and replaced with something that would be auto-oriented, a gas station or something like a drive-through restaurant, which was built 2 blocks up the street. This block, the Taco John's block, used to look very similar to the block on the left. They're only 2 blocks apart, so they're on the same exact kind of part of town, the same highway, the same everything. Here's the interesting part, though. In its decrepit, kind of run-down, neglected state, that old rundown block that the city's plans call for being removed has a total value of $1.1 million. The Taco John's, brand new, built in the post-World War II cul-de-sac style, has a total value of $803,000. You have 2 different patterns of development, the same amount of land, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same everything, just a different style. And the one that we're saying should be torn down and replaced has a value right off the beginning of 42% more than what the auto-oriented is. The financial productivity of the traditional development pattern is just amazing. And even in its decrepit, rundown state, it still outperforms the brand new kind of high end on the same exact amount of property in the new auto-oriented style. We see the same thing on the edge of the community. This is the Mills Fleet Farm property. Again, Mills Fleet Farm represents an enormous investment in the Brainerd Lakes area. You've got the double-sized big box store. You've got the auto dealership and the gas station. These are enormous investments in this community. When you look at the site has a value of $0.6 million per acre. That's a huge sum of money that's been invested here and a great amount of taxes that they pay. But if you take that same exact land area and you overlay that into Brainerd's downtown, which while a lot has been done in recent years to clean up parts of the downtown, if you look at this map in the area that I've encompassed here, it's certainly not looked at as the highest end property in the area. There's a lot of revolving businesses down there, a lot of struggling businesses, and a whole lot of space that is either parking lot or in the second or third story in particular is very low quality and underutilized. Even with that, the downtown Brainerd area in the traditional development pattern, the same size area as the Fleet Farm site, has a value of $1.1 million per acre, 78% more. What you're looking at here on the left is the kind of pinnacle, the most valuable property that you can find in the new auto-oriented style, where on the right, what you've got is a poor man's version of the traditional development pattern. And you can see, even after kind of decades of neglect and decline and the place getting hollowed out, it still has retained its value. It's still very, very financially productive. If you think about, just in the back of your mind, the amount of money we had to spend in order to attract and service a Mills Fleet Farm and the other buildings that have gone on in that 371 corridor compared to what we have to do to create that development downtown and sustain it, the numbers don't even compare. We've spent many, many, many multiples in the periphery of the city than we've spent in the downtown, yet the downtown has tremendous value and continues to hold its value over time. And again, going back to those two 40-acre pieces that I showed earlier in the presentation, that 40 acres in Baxter, these are relatively new homes, new in the last 15 years. They have a value of $5.4 million, that same 40 acres, but just applied in Brainerd's grid in Northeast, not an area of town that's looked at as being that successful or having that high a value of homes, yet the value of that 40 acres surpasses what you see in the new Baxter curvilinear style of development. The grid pattern is really very financially resilient and financially very productive. Brainerd's investments and the grid pattern is set up to make the city very, very wealthy over time. One last thing about the finances of the grid itself is financially very stable. And we'll go back to that Taco John's and that old and blighted block up the street, the one that the city's plans call for being torn down. Even despite it being on a highway where it's difficult to stop and not very comfortable to conduct business, even with it being disconnected from the adjacent neighborhood through wide streets and removal of sidewalks and that type of thing, you still see this old and blighted block retaining its value over time. This is a type of financial stability that the city needs. We can imagine all kinds of things going on in that old and blighted block. We can imagine businesses going out of business. Many of them have done that. We can imagine them sitting empty for a while. We've done that too. We can see, low value style of businesses come in there. We've witnessed that happen. Yet this thing holds its value over time and still pays, compared to the Taco John's, a relatively robust amount of taxes to the city. This is an income generator that has had stability over time. We can look at that Taco John's and say, well, this is a very nice place today, but what's that place going to be like 20 years from now or 30 years from now? And we can look around at the trajectory, the life cycle of similar buildings, not only in our own community but in other communities, and see that these are places that have a hard time holding their value over time. We see many times where, the new taco joint will open up a couple miles out on the edge of town, and the existing one in town will go into decline. The parking lot will stop being maintained. The weeds will grow up. Pretty soon, a big cost for fixing the roof comes in, and the place just gets boarded up and becomes its own blight. These places have very limited upside, an upside that is lower than what the old and blighted block is in its current state, but have a downside, a financial stability that's just simply not there. So with these strengths, it's important to step back and understand that the key to maximizing the value of the grid is to understand how the public realm is used to radiate prosperity, improve property values, and build wealth. Now, when we think of the public realm today, what I'm really talking about is the space between buildings. So when you leave a building, you've got a boulevard, you've got a yard, you've got trees, you've got sidewalk, then you've got the street, and you've got the boulevard, trees, and sidewalk repeated on the other side. That's the public realm. Today, we often think of the public realm as being the place that we drive through, and we've oriented this space to primarily serve the automobiles. But if we want to maximize the value of the grid, we need to look at this public realm and realize that it is the key to building and creating and adding to property values and building and creating wealth. And the way we're going to do that is to make it a space that literally radiates prosperity to all the places around it. There is an understanding that has been with us since the days of the Greeks and the Romans, who really studied this, and likely much earlier than that, and across the globe in different civilizations. And that is this comforting ratio of height to width. As humans, we are very comfortable in enclosed spaces. We prefer enclosed spaces to wide open spaces, and but we don't want them to be too constraining. And so there are some ratios that have been worked out and have found to kind of be the optimum. That would be a width of 3 to a height of 1, somewhere between that and a width of 6 to a height of 1. So if you have a crossing that is public realm, that's 60 feet across. If your buildings are between 10 and 20 feet tall, that will frame that public realm in the way that provides a sense of place, provides a degree of enclosure that is comforting to people. And we can go around the country and we can look at places that are comfortable to be in as a pedestrian. They are not the Walmart parking lot, which does not have any of these ratios, any of these kind of room effect of walls bounding on one side or the other. They are the places similar to downtown Brainerd, where you have a public realm that is framed by buildings that create this comforting space. We see this throughout residential neighborhoods as well. And if you go in the historic neighborhoods of Brainerd, you'll see that the buildings that remain from the earlier days when they were built in this manner frame the public realm in exactly this way. 6th Street, South 6th Street, south of the YMCA, the buildings on both sides of the roads are very old, very historic. And you can look at them and realize that this used to be the Grand Boulevard coming into town, and those little buildings were kind of the first iteration of growth on the outskirts. And the way that they were built to frame the public realm is perfect. It was designed to create a wall on each side. Over time, the wall that would be comforting to people within this space. And so the advantage that Brainerd has is that we have this grid system that naturally allowed us to create this very high valuable places. Unfortunately, and we call this the Franken city effect, we have in Brainerd and most cities in North America that have a traditional grid, have to one degree or another done this as well, chosen to fight the grid. Essentially forcing the DNA of an auto-oriented city into a city with the DNA based on the traditional walkable grid. We've tried to take our greatest strength, which is our traditional walkable grid, the idea that this was a community based around people who walked. It was designed to be walked, and it was designed to be walkable, and spent enormous sums of money trying to make it into an automobile-based city. When you do that, when you try to change the DNA, you're essentially fighting your strengths. And that's a lot of what we have done for the past 6 decades. Ways we have done this: we've had huge parking requirements. Parking requirements that really are much like the suburban style you see out on the edge of town. The strength of Brainerd is not the amount of parking, the amount of land that it can devote to parking, but the fact that you can get around places very, very easily. Yet we require everyone to put in these enormous parking lots. We pay twice for parking throughout all our neighborhoods. We pay once because we build our streets to handle on-street parking as we should in a grid pattern. That's the way that our streets should be designed. But then we also require these huge setbacks, the suburban style setbacks for our homes, which are designed to allow for car storage off the street. And so we're essentially paying for parking twice. We're paying for it with the low productivity and the increased setbacks of our buildings, and then we're also paying for it on the street itself. We do this in neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood. We fight our grid by not caring about how buildings address the public realm. We obsess over things like parking, and we don't bother to think how huge public investments such as this, the county building, will not radiate value to the surrounding community. Not only these large investments, but small investments as well. We don't seem to be concerned in any way about how these buildings express themselves to someone who is walking by in our city. We largely do this because we don't walk through the city, we drive through it. And because we've devoted so much resources into the automobile and moving people by car, we no longer grasp or appreciate the inherent value of building places that address the public realm in a positive way. Here's another example of that in a residential neighborhood. Essentially, as long as you meet the setbacks and impervious coverage requirements, we don't care how your building interacts with the public realm. We don't care if your building is despotic to people who would be walking by, largely because we would only drive by a place like this. And that is not playing to our strengths. And here, as another example, these buildings here, this is the old Sears place. This is, to me, a very sad example because you have residential properties just right across the street here. And not only, do we force them to look at all these dumpsters, but even if the dumpsters weren't there, we're asking them to look at the butt end of the building, the big wall with all the utility boxes along it. And what we're really doing is saying, we don't really care about your place and your view. And, we wonder why then people in these neighborhoods adopt a similar approach to the public realm. If we placed a value on the public realm, if we required people to actually maintain their places in a nice way and address the public realm in a positive way, and if we led by example as a city, we could start to improve and play to our strengths. One other thing that we do to fight the grid is not consider all of our people. And by doing so, spending too much money on moving cars. This is a street that was just redone in South Brainerd. And you can see all of the space that's been devoted to automobiles. I'm not sure, there's hardly anybody that ever parks on the street, and I'm not sure why we have such wide streets, especially with no facilities marked at all for people who would walk or people who would bike. I've shown these pictures before, but the idea that we have people who need to get through these spaces in order to get their basic services. I mean, we've essentially priced out all but one of the neighborhood grocers. And so in order to get just the basic essentials of life, people have to cross these dangerous, ugly thoroughfares. And we've done very little to accommodate that. People who have to, by no fault of their own, utilize their wheelchairs or their feet or their bikes or what have you, and not drive to be able to get to these places. Yet we've spent all of our money and all of our resources on the automobile portions of the community without consideration of anyone else. This is certainly not playing to our strengths because Brainerd is, in its fundamental DNA and fundamental framework, a walkable, bikeable city, not an automobile city. I'm not suggesting we can't accommodate cars. We certainly can, and we can very easily. But we can accommodate cars in a city that is predominantly walkable and bikeable. And if we did that, we would be playing to our strengths. So here's some of the keys to embracing the grid and building on the strengths that we have in this community. The first is that we need to design this place for people first. And we need to say, whenever we're doing any type of improvement, how is this going to work for the people who would be walking through here, the people who would be biking through here, the people who would be coming through here on their wheelchairs? How do we make it the most productive for them? And then, when we've done that, we say, in this framework, how do we accommodate then cars? Cars become not the predominant design characteristic, but the secondary design characteristic. And of course, these pictures are from Europe, and a lot of times people will say, well, Chuck, this is great for Europe. This is not the United States. We don't do this here. Oh, yes, we used to do this here. Of course, this is Brainerd from 100 years ago, but we certainly used to do it this way. And this is the way that our places were designed. This is the way Brainerd was laid out. This is our fundamental core of who we are. And if we embrace that, what we'll find is that the property values and the prosperity equation will respond to that. Again, in designing for people, not for cars, it doesn't mean we don't design for cars, but we put people first. We put the quality of the space first. This is a city on the left from Florida, one that was built starting in the 1990s, but was built around the notion that we're going to build a place for people that then accommodates cars. And what you see, I've put in blue the streets, and then I put in red the parking areas. What you see is that the streets are all fronted by buildings, all things that would interact with people. It's designed to be a public realm that is very conducive to people walking and being in it. The parking then is put internally. It's put behind the buildings. The space devoted for parking is there. There's ample parking, but people don't interact with it. They don't come in contact with it because it's not something you want to come in contact with when you're walking through. It actually detracts from the overall value of the built environment. On the right, of course, is downtown Brainerd. In downtown Brainerd, we've devoted a substantial amount of place, some very prime real estate, and place that people who would be in the downtown would come up in contact with all the time to parking. Cars coming in and out, vacant, wide open gaps, missing teeth in the streetscape. These are things that not only lower the overall productivity of the place, but present a negative kind of reinforcement to people who actually would be downtown trying to interact. We can accommodate cars. We just need to design our places for people. We need to look at our investments as being incremental, focused on the neighborhoods. These are the investments that will be low cost and high return. I know we're having somewhat of a conversation in this community about the idea of getting millions of dollars from the state through the bonding bill to run sewer and water out to the airport, hopefully create all kinds of development potential on the way out there, and then have a bunch of industrial development that happens at the airport. If you're advocating for that, you're essentially advocating for a huge gamble on the potential that some very low returning investments could happen between the city and the airport and then out at the airport. And I make that case very confidently because we can look at our own industrial park and the long-term carrying costs and the long-term revenue streams and see that they're just not working out for us. If we want to embrace our grid, embrace our fundamental DNA, and embrace the strengths in our community, we simply need to start looking at our existing neighborhoods and saying, what are the little things that we can do today to make them slightly more livable and slightly more valuable? We have things like this all over the place where sidewalks just stop in the middle of nowhere, where the streetscape doesn't have good trees, where things aren't being maintained well. How can we put just a little bit more resources into making those things better? When we do that, we see this traditional grid has a lot of financial resiliency, has a lot of financial strength, and it doesn't take much to stop the decline in these places and have them stabilize and then have them increase and grow in value. These are our low-cost, high-return investments. And finally, we need to stop subsidizing the competition. There's no reason for us to be spending millions and millions of dollars on projects that solely move automobiles, even when, as an afterthought, they can also move some bikers and some people who would choose to walk. These are not walks or bikes going from one productive place to another. These are not things that are going to have reciprocal land use value impacts. And that goes with the airport project as well. These may be projects that we can get grants for. They may be projects that are supported by our staff. But they are not projects that are going to be very high return, and they're not projects that we're ultimately going to be able to sustain financially over time. Those are the things we need to be focusing on, and those can be found embedded within our traditional neighborhoods. So to conclude and get back to our takeaways, Brainerd is built on a traditional grid. Our DNA, our basic framework and structure, is a traditional grid. That's how Brainerd was laid out. That's how it was initially built and constructed. And, that's who we are. That's a great thing because the traditional grid has many, many strengths. In fact, the traditional grid is in many ways far superior to the post-World War II auto-centric, auto-based development pattern. The traditional grid has a lot of strengths, a lot of resiliency, and in terms of the overall financial health of the city, is a vastly superior approach than anything that we could possibly do as an alternative. And then finally, Brainerd can improve its overall prosperity by embracing its grid, by understanding that we're a traditional city based on a traditional grid, by understanding that that grid has strengths. If we play to those strengths, if we embrace who we are and actually work on that, on playing to those strengths, we can become a much more prosperous place, much more financially successful. I want to thank you for being part of this. We have more in this series coming up, and we'll be releasing those here on the website as well as time goes on. Thank you, everybody, for what you're doing to make Brainerd a better place. Check us out at abetterbrainerd.org. We're online on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to be in touch with you, and we'd love to have your help and support in making Brainerd a better place. Take care.